So, so thank you first to Univocal Publishing for organizing, for translating the book and for organizing this event, and thank you to the departments of the university and to the institutions, that took part, so in the organization of this workshop. If I understood correctly, what Drew told to me, today we will more specifically deal with the Béla Tarr book and cinema, and tomorrow we will address wider issues, about my work and the problems my work deals with. Well, just this is why, for today. First, I will very briefly only, tell some words about this Béla Tarr book, and why I wrote it, why I write about cinema, and why I wrote these books in particular. Well, as you certainly know, I'm not a film critic. I'm not a film theorist. I never taught, film studies or things like that. Well, I've seen a lot of films in my life, at different moments, and with, of course, different perspectives, different forms of interests and different modes of focalization. Well, the first point, I think, the very basic point is that when I see a film, and when I love a film, each time, I want to read something about the film. I want to read something that can prolong, that can extend, and also translate, the power of the affect, that is contained, in the succession, of images on the screen. Well, because for me, the sensible, it doesn't mean immediacy. For me, the sensible is always a set of differences, So, and for instance, a film is never, the kind of immediacy of the effect produced by the specific medium of cinema. But the sensible, in a way, is always a set of differences, always a relation. And if we start from the most basic thing, the force, of a cinematographic effect, is that it always comes, in the place of the effect that would have come or that should have come normally. So in fact, this is kind of difference. So in a shot, when there is some kind of effect, which is produced, it means that there is, in a way, an expectation that has been, ever fulfilled, or more often, precisely, betrayed or transformed, And in a way, I think the role of words, is to translate this kind of shape, this kind of depth, of difference inside the image itself, And I think it is the role of words, precisely. Writing about cinema. Is trying to give a kind of translation, of the sensor way, event that has happened on the screen, to translate it into another kind of sensory texture. So this is why, as I said, when I love a film, I want to read something, that could translate precisely this. But very often I don't find it. And so people should have written this for me, but did not. So I tried to write myself, and this is how I happened to write, about cinema at different moments, in my life. So in the case of Béla Tarr, I first saw Béla Tarr's film 12 years ago. It was a retrospective in New York, at the MoMA, I remember Béla Tarr presenting in the MoMA and saying, "Oh, how great, how incredible! It's fine weather. It's fine weather." It was in full, except that it was 3 weeks after September 11. It's beautiful. It's beautiful, outside, and you are here looking at those sad films about a very sad country, and where it rains, all the time. It's all rain, mud, and sadness, etc., etc. And it happened. Some kind of effect, this kind for me, because of course, you are looking at well, at Satan Tango, you know, and of course, I think this is an interesting experience, you know, where at Satan Tango and at the beginning there are those cows, you know, while that are leaving, you know, the farm. It's very long, takes I think perhaps 7 minutes, and of course, it's a kind of experience. Either you decide after 3 minutes, well, okay, I know cows, and you know, and I get out, you know, or you stay until the moment where precisely this kind of slow movements around, well, you know, mediocre beings, you know, in a kind of quite a dull and depressing environment. There is this moment, you know, when this puts a grip on you, and you cannot, and you cannot escape that grip. And so the point is, well, how translate it, how account for it, and how translate it. And I just, you know, after I did not write about Béla Tarr just after having seen those films. I just wrote a small article for the Cahiers du Cinéma when they presented Satan Tango in Paris, you know. And of course, there was some need to help, you know, the movie theater, you know, to give some, you know. Okay, but well, and it happened that so 2 years ago I was asked, you know, by a French publishing company who publishes about cinema and also publishes both sometimes DVDs and books on cinema. So I was asked to write a short book about Béla Tarr for a retrospective, you know, that was organized in Pompidou, and that should coincide with the release of the Turin Horse in Paris. You know. And so I decided to accept it first, you know, because, well, you feel a certain kind of duty, with respect to films of that kind, because those films must find an audience, even if it is a restricted audience, of course. And of course, it is not normally the kind of film, you know, so in the same way that I wrote a lot about the Portuguese filmmaker Pedro Costa, because I think we must do, if we love these films, we must do something, you know, to help them, you know, to be visible, you know, and of course it was a kind of exploit that the Turin Horse in Paris, you know, was visible during 5 weeks. During 5 weeks, normally it's 1 week, you know. Okay, but of course at the same time it was important for me also, well, it was an opportunity precisely to try to define the kind of affect, you know, by which I had been touched, you know, 10 years ago. And at the same time, of course, it was also an opportunity to deal about, well, the relation of cinema to politics, of course, and well, because, well, there is precisely this link that is made by time. So time as a form of time, of course, because as Béla Tarr, you know, is a filmmaker that started his career, you know, during the time of communist Hungary, you know, so making social films, you know, to address some social issues, you know, about housing and things like that. And of course, after his work followed the decades, the collapse of communism, and also the disenchantment, you know, of post-communism, meaning the disenchantment, you know, of the capitalist new world, you know. So there had been the disenchantment of the communist promise, and after the disenchantment of the capitalist promise, you know. And so, of course, there is this relation to a certain period of time, which also means, of course, this relation to, well, to the belief and disbelief in history, belief and disbelief in the future, you know. And of course, at the same time, you know, time plays a very important role in Béla Tarr. You can say it also plays an important role, you know, in cinema in general, of course. But we can say that in Béla Tarr, time is really the stuff, the stuff of the fiction. So something. It is not only that the film, you know, lasts a number of hours, but that really it's a fiction about time, and well, this is why I decided to write this book, and it's kind of exploration, you know. And perhaps we can. I know that there are some questions, you know, about my method, you know. So let us just say in advance that for me what's important is to always start from singularities, so a very specific way of putting time into a fiction, you know, to give an account for a certain time. Okay, I think it's enough for the moment.
Can I start off with a question, and then maybe that will get it going? I know that you sent me questions, but hopefully you have yours with you. If not, we can read them aloud. But going on that idea of time in Béla Tarr's work,
yeah.
I was really quite interested in seeing The Turin Horse,
Yeah.
Which was maybe the second film of his I had watched, and how you immediately have to relate and get captured in his sort of sensibility of the long take and duration. And so I was interested being in the cinema and watching people have to deal with entering into his fiction of time, of making us reflect on a sort of duration, perhaps Bergsonian duration. And I noticed that in your book, you say at some point that one of the main themes he does is he makes duration manifest. And I was wondering if you could talk more about that.
Okay. I think that duration, duration as I deal with it, you know, in my book, and also duration, I think, as it works in the works of Béla Tarr, I don't think that we should think of it in Bergsonian terms, in Deleuzian terms. I mean, duration is not some kind, you know, of metaphysical versus some kind of metaphysical level. So duration, for instance, has nothing to do, you know, with, for instance, the Deleuzian ideas, you know, of the peaks and of presence and the waves of the past. So this idea, you know, of the image as being at the same time a recollection. No, duration, I think, well, in Béla Tarr deals simply with lived experience. So we've lived experience, you know, and it means that I think the main purpose of Béla Tarr's work, you know, is in a time, you know, is to so he makes films, you know, about a period of time, you know, in which apparently, you know, nothing happens, so there is of course no future, you know. Well, and perhaps what he tries to do, perhaps there is no future, but try to create a certain form of present, you know.
But this is one way to interpret duration. David Lapujade, his interpretation of Bergson is about re-encountering this sort of present of duration. So anyway, I don't...
Certainly, but you know how strongly, you know, Deleuze polemicizes against the present. You know, it seems that really dismissing the present is one of the main targets, you know, of Deleuze, and certainly I think in that sense, you know, Béla Tarr is not Deleuzian at all.
No, I completely agree. But I'm looking off of Lapujade's argument. But your answer, I agree completely. Question of dignity within this sort of present.
Well, I think, precisely, you know. I think what is important, you know, in Béla Tarr is making time material, you know, making time material, meaning that if time is not only, in fact, you know, just a transition between two actions. If time takes on a specific existence, you know, which means that also means that the characters of the individuals, you know, have a chance to exist, in a way. So, and I'm interested in filmmakers that give, you know, to the person that are on the screen, a chance to exist, or times enough time to exist, and. If they have enough time to exist, you know, and if they exist in a material way, you know, that their gesture or their work are not only, you know, a way of displacing, you know, the plot, but a way of doing and being. This gives them potentialities. This gives them a certain human dignity. You know. I don't know. We were discussing, for instance. I think there is a very difference, you know, between filmmakers, you know, while dealing with poor people, destitute people. So there are very different looks, you know, about, you know, a certain condition. And but in Béla Tarr, there is this kind of insistence precisely on time as the very stuff. Well, the stuff of repetition, but the stuff of repetition, if it exists materially, it can also become the stuff of a possible change.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Who would like to ask a question?
Since you were talking about duration, and to follow up, Drew gave a talk a couple weeks ago at Midway specifically about touring horse and bringing up this topic of duration. I'm wondering, at that time I was stumbling across something I wanted to bring up. Can it work both ways? Have you had the cinematic experience of duration where things slow down to the point you have to bring something out of yourself, you push through tedium into another state? Does the same apply to speed things up? If we're going to cut things up so quickly that it also creates a sense of displacement of time, so that can it work both ways? He showed another film called Gamer, which is about video games, or modern life video games. And the first scene must have been hundreds and hundreds of
jump cuts.
None more than a second or two. Can we get that same experience at both ends and towards maybe the same intention?
Well, I don't think so. Of course, there is a multiplicity of use of jump cuts. You know, of jump cuts. Of course, there was a moment. You know, that there was a moment of. For instance, if you think of Vertov, that moment, the point was really expressing, you know, the rhythm of modern life, modern life. So, in Vertov, for instance, there is a moment when there are, I think, 45 shots, you know, in 25 seconds, you know, and with several superimpositions also. So I think, there was a moment where really you could say that the jump cut was a way of expressing the dynamism of modern life, you know, with the bad times, you know, of disbelief, you know, it became the fragmented time, you know, of a kind of post-historical condition, you know, and also, of course, the jump cut could be used as a form of critique, as a form of criticism, you know. I think all those forms have been used, you know. I don't think that now they have a very rich potential, you know. So I think that basically, you know, the film that are important today, are rather, you know, films that take time, you know, so that distant time, you know, rather than film, you know, with jump cut, with this idea that, of course, by disturbing the normal time, you will create something subversive. I think that what is subversive, perhaps now always, to create some kind of boredom.
On that level, bringing up films, say, of the avant-garde, the Letters movement, for instance, when their idea of subversion was to actually mark into the film itself, create interruptions in the actual celluloid of the film medium as a sort of way to shock the audience out. Do you see that as a valid tactic of subversion, of innovation?
You know, I'm not really, you know, classifying films, you know, subversive film, more or less subversive film, extremely subversive film, and extremely reactionary film. No, I think it's a subversion, meaning that really, you know, there is a use of time, there is a use of time that is not a normal use of time, you know. And if you think, for instance, of those films, you know, where when people walk, you know, people walk in Béla Tarr. And of course, it was one of the things that most surprised, you know, that sometimes really irritated people, you know, that people take so much time, you know, to get from a point to another point, you know, because normally in cinema, you know, you know, when you move to a point from point to another point, you know, you have a shot, you know, with the person leaving, you know, closing the door, and a shot with the car, for instance, arriving, you know, at the point of arrival, you know. And of course, and in Béla Tarr, it can take, and usually they walk, and of course walk is, well, is slower, but also it can take a long time. And there was that joke, of course, that was made by Béla Tarr, so when people ask him why this shot was so long, etc. Well, he said, well, because there was a big space, between the point of departure and the point of arrival, which of course is a joke, but at the same time, I think what's important precisely is that walking must become something material, and this is well, if you think, for instance, and also, of course, it can be walking, walking in a kind of wasteland, in Satan Tango. It can be also that terrifying, sequence in Darkmeister Harmonies, of the mob. So the mob walking in the night, during, I think it lasts 4 minutes. Well, they had to go to the hospital because they wanted to ransack the hospital, and so. But I think there is a kind of freedom that is absolutely extraordinary, and which precisely makes the mob no more simply some kind of ideological demonstration, but something that is material. So those people go so it's like this, Then they arrive at the hospital, and so that they unleash, themselves, and to beat the sick, and put everything, in disorder. And at a certain moment, they are in front of a poor old guy who seems like really coming really from the inferno. At this moment, they stop, there is a kind of slowing down, and they quit, But what is incredible, is that in a way it's all about it's all about movements, it's all about reasons, So we shall never know why they do this, We shall never know why they do this, But it will have existed, and even so those, the faces of those two people, are looking at the poor old guy, and decided just to come back, they exist on the screen, So, and I think that's important, So I think that's.
So I'd be reluctant to bring this up if so many people hadn't asked you questions about Deleuze already, and the ones they sent to you. But I have one question that's sort of about the structure of the book on the one hand, and on the other hand, you mentioned that it is about film and politics, and I think it gets a little bit at that also. But in Film Fables, you, of course, in the chapter on Deleuze, you find several things that are problematic with his account, but one of the major ones is the division into the movement image and the time image, and of course the centerpiece that he lists as being World War II, which brings them together. And you find several issues with that, but one of them is this general idea of a cinematic modernity in which all of a sudden, after some event, whatever it may be, cinema seems to find its proper essence. And it seems like in the structure of the Tarr book, one of the most apparent sort of goals is to go against this critical tendency to split his oeuvre into two different times, the times of social films, the times of metaphysical films. And instead you want to show this general progression, which is all of one piece. As he says, he keeps on making the same film over and over, but delving deeper into it, from the political to the cosmological. So I guess my question then on the basis of that would be, if we're starting off with these films which are very, very much based in a political, as you say, sort of like singular atmosphere. I mean, they are in a country with very specific problems. And then he starts to extrapolate onto that, delve into that more and more, and we get this more cosmological picture in which all of a sudden the stories that we're told, or that we tell ourselves, or that we're being swindled by, are no longer the stories of a particular bureaucracy, say, but a character like Janos or something like this. And then on the other hand, we have this very material situation which endures beneath any such story that we could possibly tell. So then we get this great duality at the end. The Turin Horse gives you the situation over which all stories would be told, and then the Man from London is the any story could be draped over top of it. that cosmological moment where we get to that great duality, is that moment still born of the particular situation in which Béla Tarr is working, or at that point has he sort of built outside of it, perhaps by virtue of the medium itself, into some sort of essence of politics and a more essential political problem that can be generalized outside of his particular context?
Well, I think it's it's hard. It's hard. To give really, a good answer, a good answer to the question. So you have summed up, what Béla Tarr says, about what he was doing and what he is doing. Well, I think certainly, in Béla Tarr there is. Well, I think. Of course, there are the films of the times of communism and the film of the time, of the collapse, capitalism, etc., and the disillusions, So I think, what I think is that what Béla Tarr does is really from this moment, trying to extract from the social problems or the social conflicts, something of the conflict with the limit. So trying to go to the limit of the human. Of course, it's interesting if you think, for instance, of the of course there is this relation to a kind of Dostoevskian atmosphere, and certainly also he was influenced by Tarkovsky, and also he is creating films on the basis of novels written by a very dark Schopenhauerian novelist, Lesko Krasnaokai, So what I think interesting, of course, the context before was all the problems of socialist Hungary, etc. At this moment, the context also for a Hungarian filmmaker, filming in Germany, in this kind of atmosphere, let's say of post-communism, also with so many people coming from Soviet Union, to Germany with a kind at the same time of resentment, against communism, a kind of let's say Dostoevskian interpretation of what happened, etc., etc. Well, this can lead to some kind of scenario of resentment, but I think what he did at this moment, what really great filmmakers is precisely shifting from a scenario of disenchantment, disillusion, to this scenario of limit. So after all, the point is not to know about whether communism is criminal, whether capitalism is not criminal. The point is this kind of confrontation of the individuals, with what they can expect, which at the same time is a confrontation with the limit, with the limits, of human potentials also, and so there is always in Béla Tarr, this relation, for instance, to the animals. So the animals, are present everywhere, and so there is at the end of Damnation, the dogs, and at the end the hero, is barking, with the dog. So he has become a dog in the Turin horse. So in a sense, the horse is a kind of also is anticipating what will happen to them. So I think there is this way of delving, so always deeper in a situation. Up to a kind of very limited scenario, so two people and the end of the world, what can I say more except that of course we can interpret it in terms of continuity, in terms of inner transformation, in terms of rupture, but I think that in no case, you know, it could be identified with some kind of rupture, you know, some kind of rupture between movement image and time image, you know, and I thought so. So I don't think I can interpret it in Deleuzian terms, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a follow-up question to the horse. As you know, the Turing horse is a reference to the famous story of Nietzsche. And also the final sentence in English of your book says the closed circle is always open, which seems also to me to be a Nietzschean gesture. So I'm wondering how you read Tarr's gesture toward Nietzsche, especially considering that it's his last film and he sort of makes this announcement. So I'm interested in hearing how you read this.
Well, there is of course something enigmatic, you know, about the reference to Nietzsche. But well, there is which for me sounds, you know, as an echo to the reference of the reference to Dostoevsky at the beginning of Almanac of Fall. Reference to Dostoevsky, which in fact in turn was a reference to Pushkin. So, but I think why Nietzsche? I think of course, you know, it's about the time after. It's about the time after. It's about the end, and Nietzsche is a kind of classical figure, and even I would say at a kind of let us say, popular and kind of popular level interpretation, you know. So Nietzsche is thought of as a thinker related to nihilism and the criticism of nihilism, also a thinker of the eternal return, also a thinker, a thinker, you know, of the last man, and the figure, and of course there is in the Turing horse this kind of prophet, which is sort of Nietzschean prophet, you know, deploring, you know, the end of a certain form of aristocracy, and so what he says sounds more or less like, you know, the very famous, you know, Nietzschean apologue about the last man in Zarathustra. So I think there is all this, and there is a horse, meaning precisely that Nietzsche is not only the thinker of all this, but also in the common opinion, you know, it is a thinker that has become mad, you know, that has become mad because he was trying to think, you know, about was matter of end, renewal, return, and relation of time to eternity, things like that. But at the same time, I think that Béla Tarr is more interested in the horse itself, you know, than in Nietzsche, you know. And this is why I try to suggest, you know, that there is a kind of condensation in Turing horse, meaning that the horse, so Nietzsche's horse, it's also a kind of camel, you know, also kind of the camel, you know, of course, who wears, you know, on his shoulders, you know, the whole burden, the whole burden, and this is the case, and this is precisely what the horse does, and this is also what those two poor guys, you know, do. So, but again, I think that there is this shift from the problematic of the end, etc. As problematic, you know, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, things like that, you know. And also, of course, post-history, after history, you know, shift from this to this situation of the limit. You know, so the moment when, you know, the father, you know, and the daughter, they live with the horse, and then they come back. The moment when, you know, they close the stable, because and we know that the horse will die. The horse will die, and I think he's more interested, you know, in this use of the horse, you know, as a kind of at the same time, you know, the animal looking at human beings, you know, looking at what human beings, you know, are, and the point towards which, you know, they are heading to, you know, and at the same time, there is a kind of prefiguration of of their condition, you know, like the dogs could be, you know, or the cat in Satan Tango. So, well, so in a way, I don't think that Béla Tarr is much interested, you know, with ideology. He's interested with the possibility of making really a material plot, you know, out of, you know, the ideological themes, you know, that are, well, in the air. Okay?
Yeah, so this is just following off of a couple of remarks you made that sort of sparked the connection in my head regarding the time after.
Yeah.
Especially given this conjunction with animals in the time after. It makes me think Decosio. Decosio's reading the Phenomenology, in which he talks about a slowness of time after the end of history, in terms of a return to animal existence. And this gets picked up in the early 90s by, you know, none other than Fukuyama, who will talk about the end of history, the dominance of liberal democracy, precisely as this return to animal existence in political terms. It's precisely this sort of politics has come to an end because liberal democracy is dominant. This is a time after. It's also a time that is animal time or animalistic time. So I'm wondering to what degree, one is, how might that frame precisely this discussion of Tarr? An attempt perhaps to reclaim slowness, to reclaim a certain kind of animality without, on the other hand, confining it to this notion of an end of history in the sense of a neutralization of politics. And then, in addition, I suppose, how do we frame this in terms of, let's say, the geopolitics of aesthetics or the aesthetics of geopolitics? In other words, how do we think this in a scenario in which, you know, at least for a long time, and maybe since at least, you know, the early 90s through, you know, the late aughts, there's been this idea that somehow politics has slowed down. Whether or not that's an accurate idea, but this idea that politics has come to a halt.
Okay. Well, I think, with the idea, with the kind of Fukuyamian, you know, idea of the end of history, you know, I think it doesn't mean that that, you know, well, time is slowed down or history is slowed down. Rather, it means that now, precisely there is no. You can no more think in terms of long history of a future to come. But in terms, you know, of really the very next future. So the idea of now, you know, we are no more in the time of great expectation, but well, you know, in the time, you know, of the statistics, you know, for the six past months and the forecast for the 6 months to come, so, and prediction for the 6 months to come. And so I think the idea of, I don't think that the idea of the end of history, you know, amounts to the idea of a slowing down of time, you know, because you can also think it in terms, you know, of the reign of speed, you know, and in fact you have two kind of interpretation, you know, of the end of history, you know, so that everything has become flat and slow. Oh, everything has been very, very speedy. It's kind of eternal present. I think, well, so of course, I think that you even translated Virilio.
Yeah,
so
that's exactly what
yes, okay.
completely the opposite.
Yes. Yeah. So I think there are entirely different interpretations of so-called post-historical time. You know, I'm not sure that this post-historical time exists, but it is true that there are two opposite interpretations. You know. Basically, precisely, well, the idea that the new time, you know, is either the time of the absolute present, or the time, you know, or the time of the next 6 months and last 6 months. You know, but there are the two main versions. You know. So mainly, let us say a time of uniformity and repetition, you know. And so what Béla Tarr does, I think, by slowing down the time of the film, you know, in a sense, you know, I would say is, well, to get out in a sense of, you mean something? No, but okay. If you want to interrupt me,
I'll say something in a second.
Okay. I think, it's to get out of the time of repetition. Because what does it mean, the time of repetition? You know, the time of repetition means that what you do has no importance, you know. Has no importance, you know. And well, precisely slowing down is giving a materiality, you know, to the act, to the thing, to the expectation, to the gesture, you know, giving them back, you know, an importance, you know.
And this is something I think reminding me of Aurelio's idea of the acceleration of time, where we're dealing with real time more and more, where our exchanges can happen so fast. You know, I can send you an email very quickly, or I can plan the time and we can meet in a coffee shop, we can sit down, we can recapture a certain space for time. And so one of the reasons why I showed Gamer the other day with very fast jump cuts, emulating a lot of real-time interactions in gameplay, and comparing it with Tarr's slow long takes, is that we're much more comfortable, at least for me, watching the fast-paced movie was easier. It was much more comfortable than having to force into this slower temporality. And I think this is something we continue to deal with because we have access to real-time communication so quickly. Which I think is getting somewhat at what you were interrogating with various temporalities and ways of sort of regaining a relationship to the materiality of time.
If I can jump back into the question that was, I'm working on a book of Jean Epstein, and recently I saw him write, if draft animals and cows could commit suicide, they would. And then it struck me that, in fact, this film of Tarr is a film about a horse committing suicide. But this is something we can't think of, precisely because it's in it's a post-historical temporality. And if you see the film from that perspective, then you realize that there's also an immense sort of novelty in this time after. That also links back to Andrea's question. Eternal return of nature is precisely not repetition, right? It's the arrival of the new. So I wanted to ask you, what is where is the new? Or I mean, you mentioned the time after is not the and, it's not an ending. So how do you think the new from that perspective?
Well, I think, of course, you are right. The new very often can simply mean the possibility of suicide, you know, and possibility extended even to animals. Well, and of course, no, the new. I think the new in Béla Tarr, I think, is really the possibility. Is really the possibility of turning, you know, the time of repetition, you know. Well, into a kind of escape, and the escape can be just you know, suicide. You know, if you think of the case, you know, Tango, so the case of the little girl. You know, well, in a way, she does something. So everybody is cheating, everybody is betraying everybody, which is supposed to be the normal, you know, way things happen, and so everybody makes promises. Nobody believes, and of exposition, but not a way of not a way of investigation, you know.
You say Anglo-Saxon, I think of it as the French way.
Okay. That's the usual way. That's the usual way, you know.
I know there's more questions. Don't be shy. No?
Well, we think I'll throw in a question about that goes a little bit against what you were saying, because I feel that the Tarr book, or what Joe was suggesting, which I like a lot, but it seems that the Tarr book is doing something with la fable cinématographique, the cinematographic fable. Is it a postscript? Is it a slight adjustment? Is it revisiting the main thesis of the thwarted fable of cinema, which falls back on the wrong regime of the arts, as opposed to embracing the aesthetic regime of the arts? It seems you're doing a little something with that, but I'm not sure exactly what. So my sense is the notion of suspension, the notion of materiality, duration, and not the Bergsonian duration. I think those are very present in early silent cinema, for instance, or in the early film. So I'm wondering if it's also a beginning in some ways. The time after is also the time after the cinematographic fable, or you're coming back to maybe revisit the whole, construct of cinema that you've come up with. I don't know. That's
okay. Well, let's say at different, there are different moments, in this sort of cinema, moments when, there is a kind of affirmation, of a return, of a return to what cinema was, or what it should have been. For instance, if you think of Godard, so Godard, of course, it's with a sort of cinema at the same time, kind of closure, closure of the time of cinema, and at the same time, a kind of return to the beginning. So doing with the whole history of cinema what Vertov did, for one day in Moscow or Odessa, in a sense, So, but in the case of Béla Tarr, of course, this moment when, it is no use, in a sense, it is no use to invent new stories. So there is possibility to come back to kind of a dream of cinema as it was, formulated by Jean Epstein, So there are no stories, there are only situations, the story is a lie, etc., etc. And in a sense, precisely, Béla Tarr, of course, goes back from, the communist story was a lie to stories in general are lies, stories in general are lies, and so if stories are lies, well, you can get back, not get back to some kind of desperate, view of the end of humanity, but rather get back to the very stuff of stories, which is time, which is situations in time, and but. Well, I think at the same time, what Béla Tarr does, I said, earlier, is always a form of thwarted fable, because if you think of Satan Tango, he's following a book, and all the chapters, of the novel are in the book, and the novel and the film begins and ends just like in the book, But at the same time, he has created lines of deviation, and if you look at what happens, with the suicide of the young girl, what happens with the story of the peasants, going to create this kind of illusory new community. Well, we have traced, so kind of straight line, that makes a deviation, from the circular, logic, narrative and ideological logic of Krasna-Orkai, which means that, the idea of cinema as a kind of pure art of the sensible, or pure art of situation. Well, it has always existed. At the same time, it has always been a kind of utopia, because this ideal cinema has always been constructed, by taking a distance, from the inside, a distance with the plots, that have accompanied the whole history of cinema.
I wanted to ask you about something else. This is maybe related to Joe's question about that in this book there really is sort of the figure of Béla Tarr, the kind of the sort of a discourse of the director, sort of as inherited from the theory of the auteur. On the one hand, so you really also get, that's also the first part of the type of Béla Tarr. But on the other hand, as you say, this is also an encounter with the singularity of these particular cinemas and these particular films. So I'm sort of wondering how this, it seems to me there's a kind of tension in the book between these two different sort of types of narration. On the one hand, the sort of discourse of the director, who's this sort of independent consciousness, who's sort of creating artistic products or creating things, and then on the other hand, this question of singularity. And so I don't think these things are incompatible, but it seems to me that by sort of figuring Béla Tarr in this way, there is a bit of a kind of threat of a kind of anthropocentrism, or a kind of maybe a humanism, or something like that. And in another sense, I wonder if whether what Tarr is suggesting is at the end of the day, the director simply, the concept of the director simply has to go. That we don't at the time after, you say a little bit about this at the end maybe, but that there's something sort of unstable about the concept of the director.
Well, as I said earlier, usually, I never write, about, never write about authors, I always write, about works, or about singularities, like, for instance, the singularity of mode of narration, for instance, Well, in this case, there was this proposition, to write a book on an author. And it was the first time. No, I did it once with once with Mallarmé, but it is also because it was a series, about authors. So I had to, and in fact, I had proposed Flaubert, but Flaubert had already been taken. So I chose Mallarmé. So for this reason. But what interests me in also I think there are two things that can interest me, for instance, in dealing with specifically an author, which is I think always trying to transform the conception of art, what is more or less identified with that author. So in fact, with Mallarmé, it was about really questioning, the modernist vision of Mallarmé. So trying to overturn this vision, So the question, and it was not a book, about Mallarmé in general, and with all, all the work of Mallarmé, but precisely trying to change really the view on what a poet was doing, and so in the case of Béla Tarr, of course, it's also an attempt producing, a kind of a slight difference, in regard with the idea of, of course, the post-historical, filmmaker, which is, of course, in a way, I would say that, I spent a lot of time polemicizing either against, the idea of the historical time, or the idea of modernism, or against, the idea of the postmodern or post-historical, way of dealing with things. So of course, there is also this background. So I'm interested, in trying to question, the usual idea of the after. And at the same time, I thought it was possible. It is possible, to write about Béla Tarr because precisely there is a kind of strong unity, in his work, and of course mostly, from Damnation to the Turin Horse. So I would never written, a book, on a filmmaker, was the multiplicity of styles. So I would never, write a book on Fritz Lang or Raoul Walsh, or I don't know, because I wrote about Rossellini because about a certain sequence, of films in Rossellini. So for instance, I wrote 2 texts on Rossellini, on the sequence, let us say, the Ingrid Bergman, story. In a way. I wrote another text on Rossellini about the philosophical films of Rossellini, for instance. So it's always about about the singularity. So I think in the case of Béla Tarr, you can really have a view of his work in these terms, a kind of singular form of directing. Which means, of course, that I have also to, in a way, when I write about a film director or an artist, I usually try to produce also a slight difference, in the way the artist himself, or herself thinks or his or her work, So this is what is interesting. Usually, I think, the discourse of the artist on his or her work. Okay, it's interesting, but what is interesting is what he is doing, and how it is possible to translate what he or she is doing. So it's also in the case of Béla Tarr, he is an Hungarian filmmaker. I don't speak Hungarian, of course. I don't know the context, etc. So I would say that references, you know, to what Béla Tarr says. Well, as also something defensive, you know. I could just affirm this is what he does, and that's all, you know. But of course, at the same time, you know, because it's I'm a bit far, you know, from. Well, from Béla Tarr's history, etc. You know, I have this kind of reference to what he says he does. But no. I must also add, you know, what I'm not. I have no problem, you know, about the author or the director. There are authors, there are directors, you know. So I'm not really troubled by this fact. I don't want, you know, to. Well, you know, I don't want to criticize the author, so I'm not at all, you know, in this line of thought, you know, of the 60s, you know, against the author, against the subject, etc., etc. It's only, you know, the work that does itself, and you know, I don't think so. I'm interested, you know, in this relation between the personal and the impersonal, you know, rather than in criticizing, you know, the author, you know, as a figure. He is a figure, or she is a figure.
Perhaps we can open up a little bit the discussion, you know, beyond the Tarr books to other, you know, ideas about cinema. I think there was a few questions about the pensive spectator, or about sort of the articulation of maybe political, aesthetic thought, insofar as the image of cinema is concerned. And before that, I wanted to say as a postscript that the book on Mallarmé, The Politics of the Siren, I mean, I think many people I know are trying to look at exactly where political efficacy might be out of your work. And as far as I'm concerned, that is the best work for where political efficacy is. So I wanted to point that because it's very paradoxical, right? Mallarmé, you would not think of it as the most political book, but I believe that's what it is. So I just wanted to indicate that. We might talk about it more tomorrow. But so if there's a question about, you know, pensiveness or different modes of image production or image aesthetics.
I'm interested in insofar as you know, Béla Tarr's work is, although he has this interesting sense of time and duration, he still has a fairly traditional narrative arc of a story unfolding, and how that plays against what you mentioned, that human nature and the potential, you know, of transcending the social and political nature. When you talk about the writings of the working man being something that's so much beyond what you'd expect. His stories are still being told in a kind of a very traditional sense. I'm wondering how that plays against a larger, alternative forms of cinema, maybe in an artistic sense. And for some reason, when seeing the work of Béla Tarr, whom I was not familiar with, I kept thinking him against Matthew Barney, who presents a very broken, if narrative at all, but he also unfolds the same sense of time, but it's completely left to the viewer to establish his own narrative. It's supposed to be told. Well, this is your story.
Well, I think it's. I'm not sure that really Matthew Barney, allows the viewer, to create his own narrative, because there are so many narratives, and they are so imposing and so that are really imposed to him. So I'm not sure about. So I think I don't know. But perhaps he changed his manner. But I remember this big Matthew Barney exhibition in Paris that was so impressive with all this his personal mythology, and also his personal forms of creating some kind of global structure. You had to admire. I don't think that there was a possibility of really, constructing your own story. I think that's a kind of saturation. Meaning that the point is when the idea of the artist is entirely, in a sense, incorporated in the work. In that sense, when the artist leaves nothing to the situation, of the viewer in front of nothing to the character, to the situations, to the image, etc., and nothing to the relation of the viewer to this image, etc. Well, I think this is something. It is something, of course, which is entirely stultifying in the sense of Jacques, and certainly there are a multiplicity of ways of creating the possibility for the viewer to construct his own story, and certainly, of course, the slowing down of time is a particular way of giving this possibility to the viewer. Now what I tried about the pensive image, since I was also asked about the pensive image, what I tried really to say about the pensive image in the Emancipated Spectator. Well, I was trying to construct the pensive image as being a kind of conjunctions of different forms, of making image, of different functions, of the image. For instance, the way in which, in a sense, painting happens in literature, or literature happens in photography. So for me, it's a way. It's not the way of Béla Tarr. So it was also, but it can be the way of other filmmakers. So, for instance, I was speaking about Pedro Costa, on which I've written a lot, which is rather different. It is not, of course, he also made very long films, also, giving to his characters, the time to exist, but he also creates, some form of let us say, sometimes unexpected and invisible, in fact, jumps, in fact, from a form of art to another form of art. For instance, in Colossal Youth, this moment when you have the two workers, the two masons, in a burnt apartment, and apparently, they are telling what happened. They are telling what happens, what has happened to one of them. But it's not the case. In fact, they are creating a kind of theater. So at a certain moment, what was supposed to be a kind of discussion, discussion with two people telling about their life in a kind of documentary way, you perceive it has become some kind of tragedy, and they are speaking in a mode of tragic psalmody, which means that this place, that should have been defined, as the kind of place where workers live, has become in fact a theatrical stage, for instance. So I think, this is, and of course this is not, this is not perceptible, at first sight. The problem I think is that, works need to be seen several times, and of course also the potential of a work is when it gives you the desire of seeing it several times, If I saw one film by, I'm sorry, I don't want to hurt anybody. When I have seen one film by Lars von Trier, I know that I don't want to see it again, because precisely the filmmaker wanted to show me how clever he is. You are clever, but please, stay on your side. So pensiveness is also about the possibility of the artist to disappear, to disappear, in the proposition, given to the viewers, No.
One more just quick question I had about Tarr's work, and it may be his interest to your own, but also to the idea of the pensive image or the image of thought in Deleuze. Is there a certain, at least when I look at Tarr's work, it seems to be that there's a certain type of thinking that perhaps is taking place. I have a desire, at least, to want to call him a sort of cinematic thinker, in a way, and that's maybe not correct in any way, but there seems to be a way that he lets things happen, maybe perhaps not directing them completely, but allows for sort of an image of thought or thinking to sort of unfold in a way. I don't know if you agree with that, or...
Well, the point is what you call what you call a cinematic thinker. You know, cinematic thinker. You know, because of course,
a thinker in general.
Thinker in general.
Who uses cinema to think.
Normal. I think normally, you know, artists should use their art to think. You know, of course. Meaning, well, in the sense I understand, meaning that, to displace, you know, to displace the form in which, you know, a situation can be perceived, can be felt, can be thought of. So thinking. So for me, thinking means displacing something in the way in which things normally are connected, and of course you can do it by writing, you can do it by constructive concepts, you can do it by making films, or by writing or by writing literature. Certainly, you know, and but at the same and also this also means that there can be a very huge distance, you know, between things that seem close, you know. Well, you know, in this book, in the Béla Tarr book, you know, I made several references to Deleuze, you know, and now I think I should not have done then, because there is something misleading, you know, misleading in my references, you know. Because basically, you know, Béla Tarr's blocks of time are not Deleuze's crystals of time, you know.
Right.
And so, but precisely, and which is also my point, of course, about Deleuze, that, for Deleuze, cinema is first a kind of metaphysical issue, you know, and not an artistic form of construction.
I was thinking more about his thoughts about what Artaud thinks early on about the possibilities of cinema as a way of sort of reconnecting us with reality and present, before Artaud sort of disavowed cinema as a sort of saving sort of art form. But anyway, we can talk about that. Perhaps tomorrow would be a better time to talk about that more. Everyone? Anyone else? I think time to take a break, maybe, and prepare for tomorrow.
If there are
any other questions?
If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer. You know.
Can I ask one more?
Yeah.
Just because we've been on this topic of criticism. Sorry, just when we were about to leave. But the verb you keep using to describe what you're doing is to translate, and that is a fascinating verb for a number of reasons. But it also raises a couple of questions, and you know, I'm thinking too in particular, what is it about the work that requires translation? Like, I know you said it was the power of affect, right? And that what you want to get to is the power of affect. But wouldn't affect be something that would seem to at least be transparent? Like, once you felt it, you felt it. Like why do we need to translate it? Maybe I'll just stop there. I mean, what is it about the work that calls for translation? And the second question, I'll just say it, is into what language do you translate it?
Okay. Well, of course, translate. Well, of course, translation. Translation. You can say. Of course, it's not. Of course, a rigorous. It's not a rigorous concept in the sense that, you know, if I translate a novel in my own into my own discourse, well, it's not a translation, because it is still the same. It is still the same language. It's different. You know, for instance, if you think about the relation between some moving image and text. So there is something. So no, there is something. Well, there is no obligation to translate anything, you know. But you think that something happens. You think that something happens, you know, in the relation between two images on the screen. You think that something happens, you know. In a sentence, in a paragraph, you know. Of course, you know, there are ways of doing it, you know, by starting from a kind of classification of all the possible operations. We had that, of course, in the time of semiology and narratology, and there is always, of course, for instance, if you think of cinema, if you think of the work of David Bordwell, so all the possible ways of doing a film, you know. So, I think, but the point is for me, you know, that this can account for the fabrication, you know, of a film, of a work, you know. So in terms of, of course, you can recognize it, which also means that you can easily transmit it, you know. So you can teach easily. Say there is this operation, then that operation, then that operation, you know. But for me, you don't convey the singular power, you know, of what happens in a paragraph, on a page, on a screen, on a painting, etc., etc. And this is the kind of thing, you know, that interests me, you know, not what does it mean, or how is it made, you know, but what happens, and how can we transmit, you know, what happens, you know, and not you know an inventory of the operations, you know, that are used, you know. Of course, there is no necessity of doing this. I had been at a moment, you know, in my career, you know, I've been forced to do this, you know, when I was working on all those workers' stakes, you know, that are in proletarian nights, you know. Because really, it was the only way simply to make people sensitive to the fact that those people think. Those people think. So normally those people, they express their pain, they express the poor situations of the working class, etc. But they don't think. You know. So my way of doing was the only way was the only way of trying to convey this sense. But after all, these people think, you know, and when they are doing philosophy, perhaps you can say it's not so good as Kant or Hegel, you know. And when they are writing narratives or poetry, they write narratives or poetry, and perhaps it's not very good, but you know, we have to consider that they speak, that they write, that they think, etc., etc. So I think it was in a way perhaps the starting point, you know, in my method of trying to show that something happens, not only that they tell us about their condition, but they write texts, you know, in which something happens, you know, and transmitting this something happening. And I think this is important precisely for the image of thought, you know.
No, yes, I know some of you have to go to class, unfortunately, or fortunately. But any more questions before we close for today? Well, thank you. Remember, we're going to be at Midway Contemporary Art Library tomorrow at 1:15. And then the public lecture will be there as well tomorrow night at 7. Thank you, and I hope you have something to think about this evening.
Thank you. Thank you.